Good day. Now, while I have enjoyed fantasy games, I have never really enjoyed fantasy literature. In fact, it was thanks to Harry Potter that I stopped reading fiction entirely for a period of about 3 years. And it wasn't until I played Dragon Age and later Oblivion that I actually took fantasy seriously again. And then, a little bit later, thanks to a fan named BlackBear102, I was told of a series called Gotrek and Felix. And, well, now I feel a little bit differently about fantasy literature. The Gotrek and Felix series covers the adventures of two adventurers named Gotrek Gurnison, a dwarf slayer, and Felix Jaeger, a bard. The Gotrek and Felix novel series is actually fairly large, consisting of 13 books, and as it stands now, there are 3 omnibuses and 3 standalones, and most recently, 1 anthology book. The first 7 books were written by William King, and when he left the series, he was replaced by Nathan Long, and the recent anthology book was written by various authors in addition to Nathan Long. The world that Gotrek and Felix inhabit is known as the Warhammer world. This series takes place in the Warhammer Fantasy setting, which itself is based on Warhammer Fantasy Battle, which was a tabletop game that was pretty much the genesis for everything Warhammer. Warhammer Fantasy Battle came out in 1983 and was created by Brian Answell, Richard Halliwell, Graham Eckel, and Rick Priestley. The game itself was a tabletop war game that pit 2 players against each other with extremely expensive miniatures. Now, prior to this release, Games Workshop mainly just imported American role-playing games and reviewed gaming products in its White Dwarf magazine. Now, when the game was first released, the background fluff was fairly limited. You mainly only had information pertaining to weapons and things of that nature. In 1986, 1 year before they created the much more well-known Warhammer 40k, Games Workshop released a pen-and-paper Warhammer RPG, and thus moved the story from a hazy bit of background into a full-fledged setting. And what a setting it was and is. Warhammer Fantasy borrows elements from just about every fantasy work known to man. You've got your elves, dwarves, orcs, ogres, werewolves, vampires, wood elves, and Germans. Wait, Germany actually existed. In any event, the fantasy setting was fairly well written, even though it was horribly generic. The thing is, a lot of stuff is like Warhammer, but Warhammer really made the generic fantasy setting first. All these factions are thrown onto one planet. The planet is not Earth, however. The world's name is actually never given, but we know it is not Earth because there are 2 moons named Morsleb and Mansleb. Now, the most powerful faction by far is humanity, and the most powerful human nation is the Empire, which is basically the Holy Roman Empire with magic and steampunk technology. Then you have a few other human nations as well. You have Bretonia, which is basically France, and then you have Kislev, which is a mixture of medieval Russia and Poland. The elves live on what is basically Atlantis, the dwarves live in mountain strongholds, and they are, of course, a dying race. And then you have the forces of chaos. They're basically the same as the faction seen in Warhammer 40k, except since this series is set on only one planet, the warp from 40k is not ever mentioned. The forces of chaos got to the world by what are essentially broken warp gates that were built by an ancient race that never really gets a name other than just the Old Ones. The Chaos Gods themselves are identical to the ones in 40k. Now, unlike in 40k, there is an actual Warhammer in Warhammer. Essentially, there is a magical Warhammer that was wielded by a level 100 Conan clone that he used in the course of uniting a bunch of human tribes into the Empire. The series does have a significantly different tone from 40k. Whereas 40k is a grim and dark future with zero hope of success, Warhammer Classic is dark, but there does seem to be a minor hope of succeeding against the forces of chaos. Also, unlike with 40k, humanity actually cooperates with the non-human races, such as the elves and dwarves. And 200 years before the events set in the Gotrek and Felix series, the elves, dwarves, and humans all join together to fight against chaos. Now that you know the background of the setting, let's get into the background of Gotrek and Felix. The book we are going to be covering in detail today is Deamonslayer, which is the first actual novel in the Gotrek and Felix series, as the first 2 books are actually just anthologies. Now, the first book in the series is called Trollslayer, and it introduces our title characters, Gotrek and Felix. Now, Gotrek himself is a dwarven slayer. Essentially, if a dwarf has brought some sort of shame upon himself, be it anything from murder to not having enough hair on their face, whatever. They would go to a special shrine and then cut off all their hair. You see, these are your typical dwarves who treasure their facial hair. After he's cut off all his hair, he will then seek death in glorious battle. Gotrek is a badass. If the term Conan were an adjective, he would be a short Conan. He slays trolls with ease thanks to his magic axe of epic win. Essentially, the axe he wields can kill anything from demon on down. Gotrek's character is that of a barbarian berserker. He is constantly roaming the world looking for something to kill. Or kill him, actually. His personality is basically that of, give me ale and give me something to slay. He does display a softer side on some occasions, and he is definitely a good character just about all of the time. Felix Jaeger is a bard, and he is Gotrek's chronicler. Essentially, he made an oath to Gotrek that he would record his mighty doom. Although when he did, he was drunk, and he is usually drunk a lot of the time. But anyway, he starts out a fairly weak merchant son and rises in level to be a pretty potent warrior, and on one adventure he gets a magic sword called Kargul. The first book is simply an early game grind where Gotrek and Felix go on random adventures and go into random caves and get loot and XP. There are a few good stories and a couple of good plot twists, and when you read it you will instantly think of Oblivion because it is virtually identical. I mean, really. In the very first short story in Trollslayer, Gotrek and Felix go to a random inn and get a quest to look for someone's missing son. The second book, Deamonslayer, wasn't very good in my opinion. Oh sure, the writing is decent, but the second book is really just one long sewer level. Yes, it's really the book equivalent of a sewer level. Why? Because in order to make money, they have to become sewer jacks, meaning they have to go into the damn sewers all the time! It doesn't help that they fight Skaven, which are basically sentient humanoid rats, that at first glance appear to be stupid, but they're not. They have genetic engineering, sniper rifles, and magic-based TVs. The only thing stopping them from taking over the world is the fact that they are always busy fighting each other rather than their enemies. The book really drags on, and long story short, Gotrek and Felix triumph and the day is saved. However, the main villain of the book would be seen all throughout the Gotrek and Felix series and would eventually get his own spin-off book series as well. Moving on from the tedium of Deamonslayer, let's take a look at the cover for Deamonslayer. The cover for Deamonslayer is pretty good. You've got Gotrek and Felix just standing in a basic pose with a giant demon in the background. The demon looks pretty good, although the horns are kinda cheesy. And Gotrek's axe is a point of contention. Now, Gotrek right there has a single-bladed axe with a spike at the end. Throughout the Gotrek and Felix series, Gotrek's axe morphs between this and a double-headed axe. I don't know why the artists just can't get it right. Overall, the cover does a great job of generating interest, mainly because you've got a giant demon with two warriors about to slaughter it. And so now we can finally get into the book itself. But before we get into Deamonslayer, we need to first look at the little blurb that shows up at the beginning of every Warhammer book. This is a dark age, a bloody age, an age of demons and of sorcery. It is an age of battle and death, and of the world's ending. Amidst all this fire, flame, and fury, it is a time too of mighty heroes, of bold deeds, and great courage. At the heart of the old world sprawls the Empire, the largest and most powerful of the human realms, known for its engineers, sorcerers, traders, and soldiers. It is the land of great mountains, mighty rivers, dark forests, and vast cities. And from his throne in Altdorf reigns the Emperor Karl Franz, sacred descendant of the founder of these lands, Sigma, and wielder of his magical Warhammer. But these are far from civilized times. Across the length and breadth of the old world, from the knightly palaces of Bretonnia to the ice-bound Kislev in the far north, comes rumblings of war. In the towering World's Edge Mountains, the orc tribes are gathering for another assault. Bandits and renegades harry the wild southern lands of the border princes. There are rumors of rat things, the Skaven emerging from the sewers and swamps across the land. And from the northern wildernesses, there is the ever-present threat of chaos, of demons and beastmen, corrupted by the foul powers of the dark gods. As the time of battle draws ever near, the Empire needs heroes like never before. As you can see, this is a bit different from the 40k one, in that it actually makes the reader somewhat hopeful for a successful outcome. All we need is some great hero, possibly the Dovahkiin, to save the world, and all will be well. Whereas with 40k, you're screwed. Now, let's get into the book proper. The book starts up, as all Gotrek and Felix novels should, in a pub where Gotrek is busily punching out some idiot mercenaries. They of course stand no chance, since Gotrek eats beastmen for breakfast and orcs for lunch. After the brawl, two dwarfs come in. One is Snorri Nosebiter, and the other is Varric. Varric is there to tell Gotrek about an upcoming mission to a place called the Chaos Wastes. Essentially, that place is Hell on Earth, or Warhammer, or whatever the case may be, in order to find the lost dwarf hold of Carreg Doom. Gotrek is of course skeptical about them actually being able to get there, but decides to go along anyway, and in typical dwarf fashion, Gotrek and Snorri get into a drinking contest that proves that dwarves are not just short humans, as they put away enough alcohol to kill just about any normal human. The next day, Varric, Gotrek, and Snorri and Felix head out to a place called the Lonely Tower. Now on their way, Varric says that a dwarf engineer named Malkai Mackinson, from now on going to be called Mal, is working on a new project to get them to the hold. He doesn't say what it is, but starts listing off more and more bits of improbable tech, like auto-gyros and giant steam battleships that, in this universe, almost invariably explode. To say that Warhammer has varying tech levels is an understatement. You've got tech from like the 15th century, the 16th century, and a little bit of the 18th century. But then you get stuff like autogyros, which is something out of the 20th century. And then of course you have steam-powered battleships, which is something straight out of the 19th century. Eventually they make it to the Lonely Tower, and it is more or less a boom town of sorts that would be seen in the 19th century, but oh well, moving on. The project is apparently to build a giant airship. Yes, this rather unlikely bit of tech is called the Spirit of Grungi, and it is awesome. It is a rigid airship. Now, I'm not really a fanboy when it comes to, well, anything, but in this instance, I am one. I have always loved the concept of the airship. It is quite literally the only thing to ever elicit a fanboy squee. But not all is well, because they are being observed by Skaven. The rats are led by Grey Seer Thanquol, a powerful mage that is also completely insanely stupid. But despite that, he actually comes close to winning on several occasions. Now he is there to try and capture the airship, and he attacks, and it's not all that successful, and as always, he has to slink away in defeat. But one rat man does stow away on the ship. Eventually, we learn why Gotrek and Felix were summoned to the Lonely Tower. Essentially, they have to ride on the airship to Hell. Now, the reason why they want to try to fly the ship to Hell and find that lost dwarf hold is to find a magical warhammer. Hey, sounds good to me. Why else would you ride an airship to Hell? And so they first set out to the city of Middenheim to pick up two people, a wizard named Maximilian Schreiber and Ulrika Magdova, the daughter of a Kissifite noble. Now Schreiber is needed to craft some special magical runes to get across Hell safely, and Ulrika's father will supply the ship with oil. You gotta love Warhammer. One minute we're talking about magical amulets to go to Hell, and the next minute we're talking about bloody mineral rights. Eventually they set out for Hell, and Felix asks the builder of the airship if he can learn to pilot the ship so that if in an emergency he can fill in for him. Now, Mal is nothing more than a dwarf version of Scotty. He even talks like him most of the time, which is why he is a very awesome character, although in this universe he would probably say something to the effect of, "Give me that magical amulet, Captain, so I can break the laws of physics." So they get some oil from the Kissifite noble, they drop off Max and Ulrika, but that's not before Felix and Ulrika actually get into a relationship that's both kind of lame and kind of stupid at the same time, but that need not detain us at this juncture. The whole journey is suitably compelling. William King can really write character interaction and lore quite well, and you really get to see quite a few bonding moments that are really quite touching at times. Not like that. Moving on! Since they are moving through hell, they eventually run into what is called a warp storm. Essentially, it's the universe breaking. They survive, but they have to moor the ship over an ancient city in order to make repairs. And of course, Gotrek, Felix, and Snorri have to be the ones to go and make sure the area is secure. Now, this entire segment is tense to say the least, but you know something has to happen. So it's not a spoiler when I tell you that they get attacked, and the battle is at least suitably epic. So after the battle, it's more or less smooth sailing to the dwarf hold. Now I'm actually going to conclude the plot synopsis right here because the conclusion of the book is really quite awesome. But before we actually conclude the review, we're going to take a look at some of the plot holes and the characters. First and foremost, an airship that uses an internal combustion engine should not exist when the current tech level is 16th century. The dwarfs are advanced, yes, but their main source of flying is magical helicopters with guns and bombs. It still just doesn't make any goddamn sense.
It's fantasy. Since when does fantasy ever make sense? What about in Dragon Age, the ability to shoot stone fists out of your hands, or shoot lightning out of your frickin' toenails?
Now what doesn't make sense is the fact that one of the Skaven was able to stow away and was never to be found. The ship was not like 2 kilometers or 3 miles long, it was fairly small and packed with dwarfs. Someone should at least notice the smell, or not, since I highly doubt anyone smelled much better, so...
It's fantasy!
Fine, but then in the next book it's used as a flying aircraft carrier to fight a dragon. Okay, fine, it may not make sense, but that's just awesome! The characters are really quite compelling and entertaining, and they at least make sense. Gotrek is a bit more than just an ambulatory axe, as he does have a few small nuances here and there. And in later books, it is learned that he's a bloody pilot. He may not say much, but when he does, it's at least never anything really stupid, and usually it's either something important or cynically profound. Felix is a great character simply because he isn't just a simple audience insert character like Jubilee from X-Men was. He holds his own in whatever situation he is in. He usually has something intelligent to say, and he is brave without being stupid. But he is not a simple Marty Stew either. He has his own faults, and he knows he isn't some sort of super warrior. But despite this, he still gives life his best effort, and when that doesn't work, he hits the pub and gets drunk like a real German. And good God, does this man get drunk. But hey, in the Middle Ages, that was a lot safer than drinking the water. Now, after watching this review, you may wish for there to be some sort of Warhammer game. Well, there have been several, but they've not always been that good. The one that comes to my mind is Warhammer Age of Reckoning, an MMO that's pretty much dead. So if you want a really good game that's more or less Warhammer, well, look no further than Oblivion. Now, I love the Elder Scrolls series, but in the process of making this review, I noticed a few rather glaring similarities between the lore of Warhammer and the lore of Elder Scrolls. For one, in Elder Scrolls, you have a warrior emperor that unites the land and forms a long-standing empire called, well, the Empire. In Warhammer, you have a warrior emperor who does the same thing, and it takes a giant 1,000-page book to describe said events. Also in Oblivion, you have powerful evil gods that either want to give out quests and skeleton keys or try to take over the world. In Warhammer, you have the same thing, only darker and without skeleton keys. Really, one could consider Oblivion to be Warhammer Light, and I'm not complaining. Oblivion, as a sort of de facto Warhammer game, means you get a good game rather than a bad one. In any event, if you aren't into fantasy literature, Gotrek and Felix just might make you get into it. The characters are all really quite good, and the book at least tries to make some sense. And so, this is General Lotz. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go try to make an Oblivion mod based on Gotrek and Felix.